Counting the votes took a while, but the presidential picture is coming into focus. What does it say about voters and the direction of our country? San Diego's blue wave. Election results bring a more progressive city and county. How will Democrats use their newly earned political power? And from Oceanside to Poway, we take a look at some of the under-the-radar results in North County. It's all part of our election recap show. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now.
¿Qué onda, friends? In this edition of Port of Entry, we are telling the story of Charles and Giancarlo, two compadres who recently put together a graphic novel titled The Fracture. Along with this podcast episode, we are premiering Port of Entry Shorts, small video capsules of the stories we put together, and we have two to share. Catch us wherever you get your podcasts. Nos vemos pronto!
Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me on this remote edition of the Roundtable, Michael Smolens, columnist with the San Diego Union-Tribune, KPBS investigative reporter Amitha Sharma, and reporter Kayla Jimenez of Voice of San Diego. Has your head stopped spinning yet? It may take a little longer for a lot of us. The votes have been cast, if some are still being counted, but the dust has yet to settle on this cacophonous, masked-up money gusher of an election. Here to provide at least some insight is Michael Smolens, columnist with the San Diego Union-Tribune. Michael, glad you could join us today.
Thanks for having me on again, Mark.
Well, it certainly is. Been quite a week. Now, you observed in your Election Day column before it all happened that two driving forces in this election were the coronavirus pandemic and Donald Trump, nationally and here in San Diego. Let's take the pandemic first. How did it change so much in this election?
Well, it changed a lot, and it's just so interesting because politicians and political professionals were really worried at the beginning of the pandemic because they weren't going to be able to do so many things that they normally do, all of which involve, personal contact, direct contact with voters. They actually adapted pretty well through, the whole phenomena of Zoom and other platforms like that to hold events. They thought fundraising was going to be really hurt, and it actually turned out pretty well. And so did, rallying the troops. There was concern that turnout wouldn't work out well, but it did, as we've seen, largely because of the mail ballot. So I think that they will also take from this when hopefully eventually COVID-19 is just a bad memory in our past and things are safer. They will take some of these new tactics that they took into this campaign and we'll use them in the future.
And Trump, the second part of that, as you note, this isn't Trump country. He lost in 2016 to Hillary Clinton and will again to Joe Biden this time when votes are all figured up. How did Donald Trump still impact some local races? The County Board of Supervisors comes to mind. It's an important agency with a big budget that's overshadowed by doings at City Hall, and big changes coming there. Is that all the Trump effect? Explain that.
Some of it is. For the last two election cycles, Trump has had, an outsized presence in local campaigns, unlike any president I've seen. Back when Reagan was president and Obama, they were popular with certain groups and people would bring them up in a positive way. People were being attacked, for county supervisor, city council, because of potential ties to Trump. And incumbent supervisor Republican Kristen Gaspar really paid a price for that. As you recall, in 2018, she ran for Congress, and she really ran as a Trump Republican. Now, she represents the North Coastal District 3, which is, a swing district, moderate, and, she didn't do well in that campaign. She came back to run for re-election and basically tried to reinvent herself a little bit, and that didn't go over well. So that baggage, along with other things, really hurt her. And Tara Lawson-Remer, a Democratic attorney, is leading her by like 20 points right now. She's going to be the new supervisor. And the key thing there, where the importance is, of course, that means the Democrats take over the majority of the Board of Supervisors for the first time in decades.
Yeah, decades. I've been here a long time. You have too. I can't remember when. Well, let's move to the city of San Diego. It was certain a Democrat would replace Republican Kevin Faulconer in the mayor's office, and Democrats would control the council. But it's a super-duper majority now. Where have you gone, Pete Wilson?
Well, it seems all of a sudden, and a big, another blue wave hit, but this has been a trend, a demographic political trend that's been going on, again, for decades. As we know, San Diego voter registration in the city flipped to Democrat a long time ago, or Democrat dominance, more recently, but still a while ago, did so county-wide. So that's being reflected as you see that while the city council is much more Democratic now, it already had a supermajority. And let's not forget that it seems like we haven't had a Democratic mayor in a while, but Bob Filner in 2012 was elected mayor, but of course he flamed out with the sexual harassment scandal, and that opened the door in a special election for a Republican, Kevin Faulconer. Back then, people were predicting Faulconer may be the last Republican mayor in a generation or two in San Diego, given the Democratic trends. And lo and behold, the first election to replace him, now that he's termed out, featured 2 Democrats in the runoff. That's unheard of in San Diego.
And what are the biggest challenges facing the new Democratic mayor and council?
Well, first of all, it looks almost certain that it's going to be Todd Gloria, the assemblyman and former councilman, who will win the election. He's up by a little more than 12 points. We'll, see as the vote count goes on whether that shrinks or expands. There's a lot of things. There's housing and homelessness, of course, are huge. There's going to be, issues with police reforms and police oversight as a ballot measure passed that will strengthen that. But I think the first order of business really that supersedes everything, of course, is the coronavirus pandemic. We are going to see continued health problems and certainly economic problems. I think management of that is going to be a key challenge for both the new mayor and the city council.
And finally, let's talk about a couple of San Diego ballot measures that passed. Measure B, you referenced it just now. It's a kind of police reform, a new oversight commission. Is that one going to finally have teeth?
Yes, it will. There's a commission now that isn't advisory, but they basically what they do is review the investigation done by the police department. And people for a long time don't think that's adequate, but they haven't been able to get an independent commission through, I think because of all the social justice protests, the police brutality protests, the deaths at the hands of police, just changed the body politic on that. And Measure B passed by like 50%, or at least that's the margin right now. The real question, though, is yes, there will be an independent commission, be able to, do independent investigations, have their own attorneys, but the city council has to approve an enacting ordinance. And I think that's where the rubber hits the road. And, the Police Officers Association, for the first time, went neutral against, an independent commission. But they've endorsed people at City Hall, and they're going to try to exert their influence. They can't scrap the commission, but they will certainly, I'm sure, try to shape it to be, in their best interest as best they can.
Well, that's really an interesting one to watch, I should say, as we go forward. And finally, Measure E directly impacts a major development in the heart of the city. Briefly explain what developers will be able to do, and is this project going to embody the city's battle against sprawl and endless commutes going forward?
Well, it may, do some of all that. This would allow a sweeping redevelopment of the Midway District. We call it the sports arena area, which is really not a pleasant place overall. It's strip malls. It's not pedestrian friendly. We've been going to the sports arena for 50 years, I think now, and there's been calls to do something there. What this does primarily is it lifts this 30-foot height limit, and that would allow for more flexibility. Now, opponents suggest it's going to look like Hong Kong with these, 100-story high rises. I don't think that's going to be the case. The market will dictate what people will build, but there's going to be, just a lot different there. They're going to try and do less car-oriented transportation. There will be parkland there. There's nothing there now. And it will be a dense development. And short of something like that, I guess, you start building in the urban fringes, and that's a dangerous fire area. Plus, people have to commute a lot more. So that's the hope. We'll see. There needs to be a lot done with how it will ultimately be developed. But certainly, the height limit moves things forward. And frankly, if they're going to rebuild or build a new sports arena, that height limit probably would have prevented that. So that's one thing definitely that could open up.
Well, a lot to look forward to. A lot of reporting to be done after this election. I've been speaking with San Diego Union Tribune columnist Michael Smolens. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Mark.
Whether Joe Biden prevails in the Electoral College, he's the 7th Democrat to win the popular vote in the past 8 presidential elections. Yet more often than not, that translates into divided government, where we may be headed again. Joining me to try to cut through the fog of the national election results is investigative reporter Amitha Sharma, who co-hosted our election night special on KPBS television. Amitha, welcome back.
It's good to be back with you, Mark.
Well, much has been made this year of demographics in the U.S. shifting away from Republicans. All major racial and ethnic voter groups lean Democratic, except whites who supported Trump over Biden by about 60 to 40%. What are the analysts saying about this being another cycle where whites are trying to maybe hang on to their majority status in America?
They are saying that Trumpism remains strong with almost half of the country's voters, most of whom are white voters. Many analysts thought, or I should say hoped, that there would be a Biden landslide, just an outright repudiation of President Trump because of his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, a pandemic that has killed more than 230,000 people. This country saw a record-setting 120,000 new cases yesterday alone. And then there's the economic fallout from this pandemic that has left 30 million people who are either unemployed outright or have had their hours reduced because of the coronavirus. A quarter of Americans cannot pay their rent, and 100,000 businesses have closed, not to mention the president's incendiary comments on racial strife, the locking up of Latino children, migrant children in cages, and his status, the president's status, as a climate change denier. What Tuesday's presidential vote revealed was, despite all of that, and the president's impeachment, the scandals, very little of his support eroded. He's about at 47 to 48%.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about what some analysts are saying is surprising. Black men edged toward Trump more in 2016. 18% supported him, and Trump won over 36% of Latino men, along with 58% of white men. Not a surprise there. And Biden's running mate is, of course, a black woman, Senator Kamala Harris of California. Will misogyny again be a postmortem topic of discussion as it was in 2016?
Well, it already has been. I mean, Senator Harris certainly absorbed a lot of misogynistic and racially tinged attacks, like mocking the pronunciation of her first name, not just from the president, who called her a monster and nasty, but his allies and non-allies. I mean, I have to say, former Republican speechwriter Peggy Noonan described Harris's dancing on the campaign trail as embarrassing. I don't recall Noonan saying anything publicly when former Republican presidential candidate Carly Fiorina broke into a lullaby on stage. So there's been a lot of talk already on what's perceived as the license that people take in bashing women. But in terms of black voters expressing their misogyny through their vote for Trump, I don't know. I don't know that that is clear. I think that their dwindling support for Democratic candidates might just be that every group, regardless of how they are treated as a group, has their own, individuals in that group have their own personal preferences. They're not voting as a monolithic group.
Right. Now, in the 2016 campaign, Trump famously said, I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? He's presiding over the first net loss of jobs in a term since World War II. Trump's been widely criticized for his handling of the COVID-19 crisis, and as you noted, he's verbally bashed immigrants and the kids in cages and accused of sabotaging the Postal Service in an effort to suppress Democratic votes. And then there's, of course, the endless lies. Now, Joe Biden says this is not who we are. We're better than this. What are the pundits saying now about Trumpism surviving if Trump leaves the White House?
I think what you can take away from that is that Trump's appointment of 3 new justices to the Supreme Court, lower taxes, certainly went a long way in keeping voters, because it can't be ignored that a lot of voters were fine with the president's style of governance, including the daily dose of documented lies that the president has told, as we discussed, the incendiary comments on race he has made, the threats to jail his opponents, and the insults that he has lobbed at people he doesn't like, including military heroes. Washington Post columnist Max Boot, who is a known conservative, wrote this week, and I quote, "The election reveals that nearly half of the nation inhabits an alternative reality built by Fox News and Facebook, where Trump is a successful president and Biden is a dangerous socialist. That does not augur well for our future, even if the likely defeat of Trump himself is an enormous achievement." So what it means is that Joe Biden's message of this is not who we are. We're better than this. Plainly and simply does not resonate with these voters, which again make up nearly half of the country.
Well, let's look ahead. If Biden is sworn in come January, will he really be able to work across the aisle in the Senate, drawing on his decades of working there himself? And of course, that assumes the Senate is narrowly held by Republicans, which looks likely now, but it may change.
Well, if you look at a country as a collection of people who are not just bound together by nationality and citizenship, but by common experiences, and by that I mean people's finances, their health, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of division on certain issues. The majority of Americans are unified on a mask mandate. They're unified on keeping the Affordable Care Act, on passing around another round of stimulus money to help people struggling because of the pandemic. And they're also unified on having a climate change plan. So sometimes you have to wonder whether we're actually as divided as we think.
Well, that's a good point. And I hate to say it, since we're all kind of exhausted here this week, we haven't even decided this election fully yet. And people are already looking ahead to 2022, to the Senate race then, and even 2024. We do have perhaps a president-elect who's in his late 70s and may not run again. Are we ready to start all this again? And would Donald Trump be running again in 2024? Should he lose now?
You know, I've heard a lot of talk about people saying Donald Trump isn't going to go away. He's going to continue to tweet. If he loses the election, and he may just be a thorn in the side of President Biden if he should win. I don't know about that. I mean, there are a number of criminal cases he could be the target of and already is. He could be investigated for tax fraud. A New York Times series on his taxes exposed some potential criminal exposure. There's the case of the hush money he allegedly paid to a porn star. In that case, he's listed as co-conspirator number one. Those are federal cases. There's a lot of talk of the president pardoning himself or resigning early and having a President Mike Pence pardon him on those cases. And on the state side, where a strategy like that would not work, the DA's office in New York is investigating whether the president committed bank and insurance fraud related to the Trump organization. There have been bribery and obstruction of justice allegations stemming from the Mueller investigation, which was barred from looking into the president's finances. And finally, there has been talk by one former federal prosecutor who says Trump should be prosecuted for negligent homicide for the way he managed the coronavirus pandemic. So that chapter has not yet been written.
And we're almost out of time, but briefly, he's still going to have 10 or 11 weeks here if Biden is elected till Trump leaves office. What happens then?
Well, it depends. He is not going to leave without a fight. I imagine that any remaining work he wanted to get done on regulations, environmental regulations, through executive orders, he might just continue to do that. And it doesn't sound like he's going away in the court fight alleging that there was widespread election fraud or voter fraud in this election.
Right. We'll have to see how all that plays out. A lot of news to cover yet. I've been speaking with KPBS investigative reporter Amitha Sharma. Thanks, Amitha.
Thank you, Mark.
Now on The Finest. In San Diego and beyond, Our Lady of Guadalupe has morphed in meaning and form over the past 500 years.
She can be a source of comfort. She can be a source of pain. Her power comes because she has all of these different facets to her.
Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
We spent much of this show focusing on the high-profile campaigns and results, but as the saying goes, all politics is local. In North County, voters decided on new leadership and made important decisions on how their neighborhoods will grow in the years to come. Joining us to talk about some of the results flying just below the radar is Kayla Jimenez, North County reporter for Voice of San Diego. Hi, Kayla.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Well, we'll start with a couple of big choices up in Oceanside. First, you wrote about the crowded field for mayor. Initial results show Esther Sanchez is the apparent winner. What do we know about her and her plan should the results hold?
Yeah, so that was a crowded mayor's race of 12 candidates. Longtime Oceanside Councilwoman Esther Sanchez looks like she's in the lead now, and she would be the first woman and first Latina to serve in quite a while. I had a long sit down conversation with Sanchez before the results, and she said some of her top priorities are affordable housing and buying land for the city to house veterans and seniors. She was against the controversial North River Farms project, or Measure L, but she said she wants the council to take control of the housing of the future and stop letting the developer community decide. Homelessness was also a big priority of hers, and adding in shelter beds for Oceanside, which are completely full right now. And then she also suggested that the police department could do more to build trust within the community, and said she supports an independent oversight board. So we'll see what she will do for that. But that's a big change for the city. She was very different than a lot of the candidates that we saw in that race.
Yeah, we'll see how much of that she can get through with the council up there. Now, you talk with voters for part of your story. What got your attention or stood out from those conversations?
It was interesting talking to voters on Tuesday morning. Because there were so many candidates, a lot of voters chose who that they closely identified with, and many of them were in support of Sanchez, and then also Councilman Christopher Rodriguez, who came in second, that we're seeing from the results. A lot of people voted for who they identified with, whether they were women. They saw that, yes, there was only women on the ballot, or she supported fixing the homelessness and housing crisis, or they voted for Rodriguez, who's a veteran who a lot of people in Oceanside identify with, veterans and small business owners. And then it was kind of around across the board for the other candidate.
And housing was also on the ballot in Oceanside. Voters rejected Measure L. You'd mentioned that. That would have allowed zoning for a large development known as North River Farms. What were the dynamics at play, and why do you think it lost by such a wide margin?
North River Farms was definitely one of the most contentious ballot measures up in North County. That was a 585 home agriculture themed mixed use development for the rural neighborhood in Morrill Hills. It was highly contested from the beginning. It was a split 3-2 vote. The Oceanside City Council voted to approve that in the beginning, and then residents fought hard to get signatures for a referendum. So it's not too shocking that the project was opposed, because residents were highly opposed to the project when the city council approved that. And a lot of them said they didn't want that projects to be built there because they want to keep the agricultural land in Morrill Hills, and we're concerned about flooding and fire concerns.
And Poway has its own housing question. That was Measure P, and that turned out differently, the vote there. How will it redevelop the abandoned Stone Ridge Country Club?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is one of the few housing projects that we've seen pass up in North County recently. And that project will bring 160 new homes to that Stone Ridge area, which used to be a golf course and plush country club building. And that could be because voters knew what they were voting for in that project. Supporters have said they've had an associate specific plan, environmental impact report, and a map that was completely approved and put in stone ahead of time. And that did also receive unanimous approval and support from the council. So we saw early on that there was a lot of support for the project.
And there's also a couple of county supervisor seats up for grabs. District 2 stretches into parts of North County, including Poway, Ramona, and Julian. How's that shaping up to be a nail biter?
Yeah, it's pretty close right now. Both of the Steve Voss and Jill Anderson are running for that position. They're both Republicans running in historically red district, but they've emphasized different things. Voss has said he'd like to streamline the home construction process to shorten costly delays. And Anderson has said that the county should increase funding for law enforcement and the teams that respond to mental health crisis. Voss has a lot of support here in the county. He's the mayor of Poway currently and the head of the Sandag board. And Anderson has experience and is supported by the San Diego County Republican Party. So that's a tight race that we're still watching.
Right. Anderson's experience is up in Sacramento quite a bit, actually. And we just talked with Michael Smolens about District 3, which covers parts of Encinitas and Escondido. What were your takeaways for how the race played out between the incumbent, Kristen Gaspar, and of course she's a Republican, and the Democrat, Tara Lawson-Remer?
Yeah, so this was a big race because ultimately the winning of Tara Lawson-Remer flipped partisan control in the county on the county board of supervisors. And I think that showed that people weren't too happy with how the direction the county was going. Lawson remembers some of her points with that she plans to spend more of the county's reserves on critical issues like homelessness, set a gold standard for climate action plans, and put a leash on backcountry development.
And that reserve there that you referenced for the county supervisors, that's in the neighborhood of $6 billion. There's a lot of things that could happen with a Democratic-controlled board now.
Correct, definitely. We're going to see some changes playing out in the county coming up.
Yeah, we should note that's a 5-member board and now 3 Democrats, first time in forever. And I've been here a long time. I can't remember that. Well, there's a lot more we could get to, but is there a particular result or race that stands out to you that we haven't touched on up in North County?
Yeah, I think another one that it was very contentious was the Encinitas mayoral and city council race. The 3 incumbents, Mayor Catherine Blakespear, council members Kelly Hinsey and Tony Kranz, ended up winning those, we see in the early results that they're winning. And that's an interesting one because a lot of people have been upset about their leadership, and there were some tight races up there as well. So that's interesting to see and see how they'll respond to that opposition from citizens there who have been against their campaigns.
Well, of course, we're still waiting on the presidential race, some other tight races around the country, and there's some tight ones here in San Diego County to report on going forward. I've been speaking with Kayla Jimenez, who covers North County for Voice of San Diego. Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you.
That wraps up another week of stories on the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union-Tribune, KPBS reporter Amitha Sharma, and reporter Kayla Jimenez of Voice of San Diego. For comprehensive election results, analysis, and stories about the candidates and issues, go to kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.